about tricky interview questions. And I want to remind you what we remind ourselves of each time, and that's the goals that we had when we created the conference. And as we go along, we're still asking for feedback because there'll be another conference. We've had such a good time putting this one on that there will be more. And that's exciting rather than we hope nobody ever remembers it happens and we'll never mention it again. So we wanted to provide information, insights into things that would help you with your career, your professional development. We want to be able to answer questions, give examples so that you have more of a real sense of how what we talk about applies for you. And we also want you to be able, we know you're going to step forward. We would like to be a part of helping that be a more confident step. So those were the goals for creating and putting on this conference. So with tackling tricky interview questions, I get a lot of feedback from students who say that I can't believe they asked me this, or everything was fine once they stayed on my major, but then they got into other things and I really didn't know what to do. So some of those examples could be the toughest one, which is usually the first one. Tell me about yourself. And I've got some tips on how you can deal with each of these, but I just wanted to give you an idea. You can run a whole gamut from if you were going to be an animal, as Rob said in the earlier session. I've even had the one, if you were going to be a fruit. I'd rather have the animal. By the way, I was Sassy Koala till I got kicked off of the Kahoot. I like that title because someone mistakenly used it as a email address on a resume, which is definitely not appropriate, but it's my favorite all-time name. So that's why I used Sassy Koala. Today was just a day we needed to have one of those. Another question could be, what would you do if you caught a coworker stealing from the company? Another question that's difficult is, what is your biggest weakness? However, I've had students tell me that the toughest part was the other question. What is your greatest strength? We don't always know how to talk affirming about ourselves. It's easier to say what's not working than what's working. So when you're thinking about tricky questions, there could also be the questions that are illegal. And while you don't want to come out in an interview and go, well, that's an illegal question, there are ways that you can navigate it. One could be a tricky question could be, what year did you graduate from high school? For some people, that could lead to ageism. And it's a way of saying, how old are you without saying, how old are you? Another one could be, what country are your parents from? Which is getting into a whole different area. When I had a student who was on campus tell me that a question like that makes them think that someone is trying to find out if there are illegal aliens living in their home. Who is your emergency contact? That could be, it could be a very innocent question, but it's not appropriate in an interview. That's more appropriate for the HR department to be asking. If someone, we had a student who had a traumatic brain injury, was in a boating accident. And when I practiced his mock interview with him, he was a chemistry major. And he said, how do I deal with the questions that are going to come about, can you do the job? And I said, well, let's look at how you can do the job better than anybody else. And in his case, he was going to need an assistant to mix the chemicals rather than him mixing the chemicals himself because one hand was impaired. But he could tell you how to do the chemicals. And so we practiced if someone got even close to the question. And one of the ways sometimes someone will say, can you think of anything that could keep you from doing this position the way that we want it done? And the question was no. There wasn't anything that would keep him from it. There were some things that were going to make him even better at it. So there are ways to deal with these. And when you have, whether it's an appropriate or inappropriate tricky question, you can pause. And some people don't do well with silence. If you're one of those people, you could say, let me think about that. And sometimes just the pause helps you to calm your breathing, helps you to think of a way that the response is going to be a good one. You want to use a reflective tone rather than reacting. And that would come with if somebody says, "Why are you looking for another job?" A reflective tone is going to come across better than a one that's just very reactive and sounds angry. You don't want to just throw out an answer, because that's when you want to reach out and grab that answer and put it back in your mouth, because you go, the minute it's out, you go, "Oh, that wasn't the best one." So you want your response to be calm, confident. And in the case of why are you looking for another job, you don't want to say, "Well, because this person I work with has made my life unbearable." Then they'll wonder, is it possible that the next person you work with is going to make your life unbearable? Or what would that person say about you? Which is actually a question in a lot of interviews. What would your coworkers say it's like to work with you? That could be a tricky question too, especially if your coworkers are all helping you find another job because they want you gone. So you want to present yourself in a, "I'm seeking," not "I'm running from." Now, as I go through and I share some of these things, I want you to think about a tool that maybe you didn't even realize you used in an interview, and it worked. We've all had interesting interview questions. So is a tool that works for you pausing? Is it trying to be in a seeking mode? Now I'm going to ask you that again. So I'll give you some time to think about it, but I'm going to come back to that and ask you a tool that works best for you. So the questions that I do hear about the most are the ones that they're appropriate, but because the interviewee was caught off guard. Now here's one for you. If you were going to be one of the 7 dwarfs, which one would you be? By the way, this one I do want an answer to. Some of you are probably going, "What are the names of the 7 dwarfs?"
I can't even think of them all, but I would probably be sleepy.
You would be sleepy, okay.
Not because I can't stay awake, but because I value sleep.
Okay.
That's the only one I can think of, is sleepy, but I don't identify with sleepy. It's just that's the only name that pops up.
The only other one I could think of was dopey, and I know that that would not be the right
That's
answer.
the only one I could remember too.
Well, there's Doc, which would be very appropriate for Rob. And there's Dopey, there's
Sneezy.
Sneezy, Grumpy.
There's Bashful. I believe Bashful was one of them. That would be my answer.
When I asked this in a mock interview one time, I had somebody look at me and go, "Is there a 7 dwarf named Sleazy?" And I said, "No." So, and it's not a case of you need to go out and try to learn all of the 7 dwarfs to prepare for an interview, because we can't predict what somebody will ask you. But the main thing they're wanting to do is see how flexible you are. Now, if the question was, "What is one of your favorite Disney characters?" Well, mine is Pooh. And Winnie the Pooh's tagline is "Bear of very little brain." So if I was going to give that, I better have another comment to come after Winnie the Pooh, who's a bear of very little brain. I think my phrase would be, because he's so accepting of everyone. Look at his posse. He's so accepting of everybody. He's got the grumpy rabbit. He's got the hyper Roo. He's got Owl, who is above everybody on the tree, and poor Piglet. So you have to think about, if you are going to give a response, know yourself a little more and know, why is that an appropriate response and for where you are. And like the question about, how many marbles, they want to see how flexible you are. And if you're applying for a job that involves creativity, then your imagination is going to be a wonderful thing that's going to speak for you in that. Sometimes we're so caught up in trying to do it just right for an interview that we don't show our personality. Sometimes we show way more than we should. So it's kind of like, know yourself enough to know when I get nervous. Do I get chatty? Do I get loud? Do I get squeaky? What do I need to reel back? But also, do I get scared? Does my voice drop down? So a tricky interview question could be the thing that triggers your coping skills. And that's where, when we're doing practice interviews and things, we talk to people about, and we don't pass out the questions. We create the questions when we talk with you about what you want to practice on, but we also at the end don't give the questions. We don't want you to be studying a script. This is exactly what I need to say. People are just nervous enough that at the end of an interview, somebody could go, wow, you didn't ask me near as many hard questions as I thought you would. And it's like, don't do that. You know, don't put yourself back in the role of being a student. Don't ever say, if you were going to give me a grade on this interview, what would my grade be? No, you're telling them you're a professional, not that you need a sticker for kindergarten. So it's about being flexible. It's also about knowing yourself. So, okay, remember I said I was going to come back to these tools. Have you thought of one that would be the tool that would probably work best for you? Or
I
did you
have.
think of another one? You did, Shannon? What was it?
Yeah. Well, something that I've done kind of mixing the pause and the reflective tone is I've either complimented the question or thanked them for the question, which I don't know that that's right, but it just buys me a little time where I'm not sitting silently. So somebody asked me in an interview recently what my habits were, but she had already asked me what my values were. And I think those things are really closely tied. So I didn't know how to give a different answer. So I just said, oh, wow, what an interesting question. I bet you can tell a lot about somebody from that. And then just like that sentence gave me enough time to come up with the first one. And then once I got through the first one, I thought of like 3 more. And it just kind of like bought me a little time. And I think it made her feel pleased with herself as an interviewee or interviewer. And I think it always helps to make people feel good about themselves.
The one thing you don't want to say is, wow, that's a good question you're asking. Like, you're surprised that they're even asking a good one. I like how you did that. And so it's, as long as your brain can keep working while your mouth is working and you can come up with something, that is going to be great. Now, I'll tell you, we do a lot of behavioral questions. So it's kind of scenarios of think of a time when. And I was interviewing a criminal justice major. I have permission to give the example as long as I never say the name or the poor professor who taught the student. And the question was, can you think of a time, or think of a time when you were part of a group and you had to make a decision without the input of the group? What was the situation and how did it come out? So there's a technique called STAR: situation, tactic or goal, action, and result. So when you're trying to stay on track with something, STAR technique kind of helps you stay on track. So this person got the deer in the headlights look. We've all had that. And then I got the aha look, like, yes, I have an answer for this. And then I got a very fast response. I wish the person had practiced Shannon's technique of thinking before responding, because the response was, I was supposed to be the designated driver last weekend, but I got wasted and I was puking my guts out. And all my friends had to take care of me and they couldn't get drunk instead. So they're pretty mad at me, but I've decided to try real hard not to get drunk this weekend so that my friends can get drunk instead. we were role playing a patrol officer. So I went on with the interview, and then when I got through, I came back to that question and I said, don't ever say that again. There was no way I could make that response look halfway decent. I just said, yeah, no, don't ever say it again. And I said, I was interviewing for a patrol officer. Number one, if you have to schedule when you will and won't drink, I think you have a drinking problem. Number two, are you going to be driving my vehicles under the influence? Number three, if your buddies go by weaving down the road, will you pull them over? And he just looked at me and said, you got all that? I said, no, you handed it to me. So, but we can all think of times, like I said, when the comment is out there before you can think about it and you want to say, can we rewind the tape and go back and forget I ever said that? So what you want to do is you want to think about the questions, not as they're trying to set me up, but how can I present myself in the best light? Now, there are times when you could be asked an inappropriate or illegal question. I'm not going to say it's because somebody's trying to trick you. I'm going to say sometimes people don't realize that that question just wandered into, it's not a conversation, it's an interview. Different situation, different dynamics. And so the way you can respond, and the example I gave is if the interview says, do you plan on having a baby? Now that could be asked of a male or a female. But a good way to redirect it is say, you know, I'm really more interested in talking about the opportunities for professional growth in your company. Could you tell me more about that? So you've gotten it out of the personal and you've put it in the professional. And you've also said, I'm looking to grow professionally. So that's one of those things where when the question is asked, you don't come out and say, that's illegal, because then they're on the defensive. You can just say, gosh, you know, if I'm coming to work here, I have so many questions that I would really like to ask you. And you don't turn around and say, so what do you do about maternity leave? So, but you keep steering it back to the professional. And then you say, could you tell me more about that? To the question of what country did your family come from? You can say, we live in the United States. Again, during an interview, some of these questions are not appropriate, especially if they could be used for screening. And I prefer to look at it as not a case of trying to trick me, but looking at it as a case of they may not know what they just wandered into with what they said. There have been times I know I've said things that I'm like, yeah, I didn't mean for that to be inappropriate, but I could see how that statement, that question could be taken in another context. And I try to be aware of what I say, but we are human. Your interviewer is human too.
Yeah,
Donna, question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, my question is, with those interview questions being interjected at you, does body language play a lot into this play? Like looking directly in the face or in the eyes of the interviewer, and is that inadequate because it could turn into a stare down? Or how do you take and interject all those qualities into one?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you so much. Some people are not comfortable, and in some cultures, it's not appropriate to stare someone straight in the eye. Mm-hmm. So one thing I tell folks is look at the forehead. And unless you move your head up and down, it's going to look like you're looking at their face, but you're not getting that feeling of a stare down in the eyes. If someone catches you off guard with a question, there's nothing wrong with saying, I've done a lot of preparation for this interview. I didn't cover that one, kind of like buying Shannon's stall technique. And then you could say, I might have to get back to you on that one. in the meantime, I do have this question. So you can change the focus. And
Okay.
if it's not something somebody was directly intending to do. Now, if you are someone who gets nervous and twitches or something like that, you can always say, I'm a very active person and sitting still is difficult for me. So if at any point in time I look like I'm singing to a song, I just want you to know I am very excited about this interview. And you've covered that. But culturally, those are the different things you have to take into consideration. It might not be appropriate for your culture to make the direct eye contact. Does that help?
It does, or even the mechanics of leaning forward or sitting straight in the chair or taking a certain posture with that. And that's why I was just asking those
Well,
questions.
I can tell you that folding your arms while you have the interview is usually not recommended. The leaning forward, that would also go along with the tone of voice. If you lean forward and you're very angry or emphatic, that almost is viewed as challenging. So body language can come into it. Very good.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And you never want your cell phone anywhere in sight because
Okay.
it's so distracting.
Yeah, Donna, I wanted to thank you for mentioning sometime going back to the illegal questions. It could be reflective of a culture that you would not enjoy working with. And so remember that just because you agree to take an interview, that's your opportunity to share information about your candidacy, but it's also to gather information about a prospective employer. And so you might learn that this is not the type of place you'd like to work. On the other hand, it could just be evidence of a poor interviewer who does not know the questions and the areas that are inappropriate to ask about. So I think it's important for, as you mentioned a few times now, Donna, for students to practice the interviewing process, to develop some comfortable rapport, talking about themselves, the good, the bad, and the areas of improvement, to really to do their very best when it comes to interviewing. But thank you.
So with the application challenge, my challenge to you would be to think about a weakness, and the way I worded it, they could affect your learning curve. Doesn't mean you could never learn it, but you might be slower when you start out. And think of how you would describe that and what kind of assistance would you need with shortening the learning curve time. So it could be that it could be something like Excel. They say they want to use Excel in doing reports, and you can say, I'm familiar with. I have used it for class assignments. I have not used it on a daily basis. It would take a little practice. It could be that they say there's a lot of phone work involved, and you could say, sometimes I have difficulty hearing on the phone. With a amplification system, I can catch even if someone sneezes or yawns. And so you're saying, I got this, whatever the situation is. So I'd like for you to think about for yourself. And if you want to email me and tell me some things that you've realized, whether in this conference or recent interview, then you could email me and say, this is something I'd like to work on. And I'll be glad to be your pen pal and email back and forth and say, try this, read this book. Some of the other Mind the Gap sessions that we came up with that would apply to this particular topic. And remember, they're going to be recorded. So the analyzing personal strengths and weaknesses, understanding transferable skills and how to talk about them. Somebody could ask you in an interview that would come across catching you off guard, so it would get the connotation of tricky, but they could say, you've got a lot of experience. How does all this work for us? And that's where you could say, well, when I was working in food services, I practiced attention to detail. I also practiced questioning, for example, to find out if there were dietary needs. So I know how to ask a question beyond a statement. When I worked in the bank, I learned to help people who were nervous, someone who had never written a check before. So I know how to train people in all aspects. Another topic is the identifying various types of interviews so that you have an idea of what kind of an interview are you in. Are you in a group interview? How do you talk to different people in group interviews? Are you doing an informational? And navigating a workplace culture. Like Rob said, you'll pick up on some things when you're in the interview. You might wonder if that was just isolated with that one particular person, but it helps to go ahead and think, what if that's more than one person and that's a culture for the workplace? How can you fit in? How can you navigate? And when should you know that it's time to move on? These days, folks very seldom start a job and they're there to all the way till they retire. So guys, I have a little time for questions and I hope you have questions.
As you may have seen in your private chat, I was thinking about the school bus and assuming, and this is all going off of the assumption that a seat is 15 marbles high and 25 marbles wide. My answer.
Oh, okay.
And I kind of deduced from the height and being on a school bus a good bit that the height of the bus would be maybe about 40 marbles. And then since you have 15 marbles as a seat and it's about maybe you have a little bit of space above the seat and below the seat. And then using the 25 as the width of the seat, you have two sets of those on the other side, and then you have the aisle space, which is probably about a half a seat. So that's 50 and 15, 50 and 15. And then I rotated the aisle around and was like, okay, how many aisles could you fit in the length of the bus? So there's about maybe maybe 2.5. So 120 might be a little bit of an undershot. So I got a dirty estimate of 312,000 marbles you can fit in a bus.
That is a perfect example for when someone asks a tricky question. I think it would be great for you because you are so much more technical than me to say, do you want the short version or the long version? Because I can tell you exactly how I did it, or I can tell you the answer. And that will let the interviewer know you have an amazing technical mind. Now, if that question was asked of me, I would say, well, I will start adding marbles and I'll keep adding until I fill the school bus. And that's how different people work in different ways and their minds. One thing you might want to do for the way that your technical mind works is remember to ask them, do you want the long version or do you want me to just give you an answer? And that actually will work in the workplace culture. If somebody says, how did you take care of this? You could say, well, do you want the 3-point answer or would you like for me to walk you through the whole process? So thank you for being an example of that for me.
I was thinking about that through the entire thing.
Oh, I hope you didn't miss some of the other things, but yeah, that's pretty good if in this short amount of time you came up with that formula, because that is not the way my brain works. And if somebody asked me a weakness, I would say I am kind of technical, but not way technical. So if they need way technical, that learning curve is going to be all the way to Georgia on me. Thank you, James. Do I have any other questions? Guys, if you have thoughts after this session or something comes to mind later on, my email is donna-cooper@utc.edu, and I will be glad to assist. I'm conducting Zoom appointments. I'll schedule one of those if we need to have a mock interview. I will tell you that when we do mock interviews, we ask folks to, sorry, my little alarm is going off. we asked folks to let us know what it is they would be interested in practicing. And that's what it is. We practice interviews. So if I don't have any other questions, I'm going to let you go so
Thank
that
you,
you
Donna.
can the next session.
Thank you, Donna,
thank you so much.
We really appreciate it. We're gonna have a really quick turn here. Mackenzie Morgan and Varsha Komorati, I hope I did okay with that, will be speaking with us in a second about practicing self-care. So hope you'll stick around for that. Thank you.